So as the cash swap crisis continues, the debate rages over the Supreme Court's decision to suspend the deadline. Nigeria's Attorney General Abubakar Malami is reported to have asked the Supreme Court to dismiss the lawsuit filed by Kaduna, Kogi and Zamfara states, which has halted the deadline for phasing out the old Naira notes. Mr. Malami is arguing that the Supreme Court lacks the jurisdiction to rule on the issues raised by the suit. So is Nigeria being dragged into uncharted legal territory as the election looms? For their perspective on the news and issues swirling around this cash swap crisis, I'm joined now in the studio by the Professor of Communications, Arise News Analyst and Deputy Dean of the Postgraduate School at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, by the journalist, political affairs commentator and Arise News Analyst, Dr. Constance, Ikokwu, and by Arise political reporter and current affairs analyst, Gbenga, Ashiru. Gentlemen and lady, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me come to you first, Professor Abiodun. You were obviously listening earlier to the constitutional lawyer, Clement Nwankwo, and the points he was making. He seems to think that the central bank would have to obey the ruling of the Supreme Court. You know quite a lot about these things. What do you make of what he was saying?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Charles, for having me. Sometimes these are not very interesting developments, considering the times we're in, and of course the crucial events, that is ahead of us, and we're witnessing all these back and forth. But the first thing to say is really that we have had so little of presidential intervention. I think our president seemed to have a laissez-faire approach, to some of these things, whereby, he delays in weighing into, disagreements, crisis of confidence between the subnational government and agencies of government. Because I want to imagine that if he has weighed in, bring about some level of understanding, some kind of camaraderie, meeting points, create broadened the minds or all the issues and the minds of operatives. I think this legal back and forth will probably not be happening as the case could be. That's the first point I want to make, presidential lethargy with greatest respect. The second one, Charles, is that the Supreme Court is probably trying to create this time a convergence between social justice and legal justice. Yes, I heard you very clearly when Charles talked about, cool facts. This time around, they're with Clement. They're not looking about cool fact, but they're also trying to be considerate, looking at what is happening in the society. The sociology of it is high in their minds, and as reputed to be a policy court as well, they have intervened, asking the central bank, asking for a delay in the implementation of the policy, as the case could be, perhaps to mitigate the pains, the reigning pains, reported pains on the people of this country. Welcome development, and that's why the 15th deadline they have given seems to be a respite, and that's why we'll see some kind of calm in the politics. Against that background, we will say that, okay, the CBN should probably listen to the Supreme Court. And finally, I think that there's no big deal about policy swap, about currency swap. Nigeria is not going to be the first country where this kind of policy will hold. The problem we just have in our country is one of policy implementation. Functionaries, operatives often find a reason to circumvent processes, to manipulate it for self-aggrandizement. Otherwise, it should have been seamless. We have made several references to UK, to India, and of course we saw, yes, there were challenges, but of course it wasn't as problematic as we are presently having. Perhaps, again, we have to be back to the question of behavioral and attitudinal change, such that patriotism can be enhanced, team spirit can be enhanced, and belief of the citizen, with the states, again, can be better, better fostered in the interest of the proper evolution of this country, not just as a nation state, but as a nation, that we can be proud of in the committee of nations.
Okay, let me come to you, Gbenga Ashiru. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from our overflow studio. You've been out and about. I mean, you are a political reporter. Do you get, I wonder what sense you have of the reaction of ordinary people to the Supreme Court ruling? I mean, and is that reaction different from how they feel about the CBN policy of redesigning the Naira at this point?
I mean, when you look at this whole situation, the fact that the law of natural justice says that the Supreme Court wields that status of the last resort. And now, even when you now look at the law, the provisions of the law, Section 287, subsection 1 states that the Supreme Court's ruling is binding on all institutions and persons in the country. And even on the specific matter on ground between Kaduna, Kogi, and Zamfara states, taking the federal government to court on this issue of Naira swap, you can refer to section 232, subsection 2, that states that gives the Supreme Court jurisdiction over disputes between state governments and the federal government. But now, you look at this and you begin to question the integrity of purpose. For a CBN governor, perhaps if he is not even committed to owning up that he wanted to campaign, but he had campaigns of he coming out for presidency and he did not come out to deny it. This is the person that holds the custody of materials in which we would use for our voting, and you did not deny it. And it has allowed that this has drifted to this stage. It calls for serious questioning, and anyone looking at this drama would say that this nation is drifting along dangerous precipice. It's really unfortunate, because how does this speak to the common man or the old woman in Abeokuta that would have to give his children 100 naira, 200 naira, or biscuits to go to school? So when you begin to bring practical imagination, when you begin to connect with how this plays out, you begin to think that this country is drifting to anarchy. Now, coming back to the Supreme Court ruling, interim injunction rather, it takes 7 days. I listened to what the Attorney General was trying to say. He was trying to say that that the federal government has a right to be recognized as an institution that has the right to appeal the ruling of the Supreme Court. But however, he's pledging that whatever the outcome is, the federal government would abide by the decision of the Supreme Court. But that is not to deny the federal government the right to appeal the interim injunction.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed, Gbenga. There's a bit of a hum on your line there, so we may have to fiddle with a few knobs before we get back to you. But let me come to you, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. Thank you for your patience. Is all this back and forth between the Attorney General, the CBN, and the Supreme Court what people want to hear about right now, or are they much more interested in just having access to enough cash to transact their daily business? And I mean, this more than anything else is what they really care about.
Of course not. This is not what people are looking to hear. Like we have expatiated throughout this program, people are really going through a lot. At the ATM machines in the banks, we've seen all sorts of drama playing out, which is avoidable. I mean, the federal government at this point is walking a tightrope. Everything has gone awry, as it seems. You could argue that the central bank is exercising its mandate under the law or according to the law. It has the powers to change currency. But the issue at this point is that the way that it has rolled out everything is very disappointing to so many people and close to the election. And the other thing then is the governors that have gone to court to challenge this matter, this currency that has been changed. What is their motive? Are they really interested in the suffering of the people, or are they arguing for the fact that, I mean, they have said that the policy is targeted at them? So these are the issues. at the end of the day, people want to see this go away. They want to go to the banks and get their money and prepare for elections. We have also had some talking about this being targeted at ordinary people so that on election day, they do not have money to go to the polls or to travel to where they have the need to travel to cast their ballot.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And Professor Abiodun, as someone said, if you don't have money, it makes you more vulnerable to vote buying, doesn't it? Assuming those who buy the votes actually themselves have the cash to attempt to buy those votes.
Yeah, of course we know what our system is. It's still very, very prebendal, so much about materialism. And of course, when it's election time, do not forget, the average voter, a large proportion of the voters think that is a time for harvest, a time for them to grab with a few things from the politicians. And of course, we know sections of politicians are always ever ready to cash in on the vulnerability of the average voter too, by offering them cash, just to buy their wish. We cannot rule that out this time around again. We have made the argument severally. It's going to take a lot more time before we can get out of this, such that voting, will be conscientious. Voting will be one coming out of the soul, the deep recess, of the average voter. It will take time, to take lots of behavioral change, communication, etc., for us to get to that stage. Even though, we're not saying that a lot of other people are not voting out of their own conviction, But again, Charles, I think we'll probably have to go back to this question of justice, and of course there are different kinds of justice. There's a difference between social justice and legal justice, or moral justice as the case could be. And there could also be a difference, between truth and justice. And that's why we're saying that we probably should limit, how we subject this controversy to litigation. Because litigation can be endless. And when it becomes endless, it can affect an important event like the election, and of course another important event like the census coming up. Litigation sometimes, if the judges want to look at the cold facts of the law and they restrict themselves to that, we do not know how it's going to pan out. And of course we cannot blame them, because they are simply out to interpret the law. That's what they are meant for. So overall, I think it would have been better if we have some political solution, and that political solution can come from the president, no one else, because he owes the ace, and of course citizens, top chieftains will ordinarily be very respectful of him. We need that kind of rapprochement coming from him. We need it to be triggered by him, at the level of governors who have gone to court, the CBN themselves, and all other operatives. And how about finally, getting the operatives, the functionaries in the banks to do what they are supposed to do? Release these funds to the populace, because it was initially meant for the populace. So all hands have to be on deck, so that we'll get things going and prevent a descent, or the feared descent to anarchy, something that may not be out of place at a critical time like this. But that's not what we want as a nation. And of course, to get that done, all hands definitely have to be on deck, led by the president, Charles.
Okay, thanks for that, Prof. Let me come to you, Gbenga Ashiru. I'm assuming your sort of audio has improved considerably since we last spoke. I might ask you to wear your political hat, because of course hovering in the background in all of this is the very public accusation by some members of the ruling APC party that the central bank and other ghost figures are plotting to turn voters against the presidential candidate Bola Tinubu in the presidential election, the APC presidential candidate. I mean, how do you see that playing into all of this?
It's rather unfortunate, Charles. I read about even not just the APC, even the PDP trying to politicize the current situation. I think that the current situation demands a real deep concern by all stakeholders in the polity. I read about allegations saying that by Anthony Hilebo of the PDP accusing the APC of setting aside 21 billion naira for vote buying, and now the APC is also accusing the opposition saying that they are turning the voter against the president, But again, the buck stops at the president's office. How would posterity preserve how he's been able to handle a delicate transition period like this? How he midwives it would definitely go down in history for everyone to see. Now the country is at a dangerous precipice, and it needs all the think tank to navigate this country away from this this dangerous lane it's currently treading. It's quite inspiring to note that just yesterday, the president called the CBN governor, the AGF, and some other key stakeholders to put heads together to find a solution to some of this crisis. I think that this is a step in the right direction. But turning the voters against the president, I think we shouldn't insult the intelligence of an average voter, because we can see what this administration has done in terms of governance, and everyone knows where the shoe pinches. When you look at the picture that comes to mind of when you see the struggling, the fisticuffs at the banks and things like, you ask yourself, how much do these people have in the bank? Now, another point is how the key stakeholders has responded to some of these challenges on ground. We heard the INEC chairman just yesterday said that there is a collaboration between INEC and the NNPC. But does that address the question? No. Is INEC going to vote for himself? What about making all this available to the average citizen? So those are the questions. Governance, and so far so good. I'm not particularly impressed with the level of thinking that is being displayed at the top hierarchy of governance. And that is what could lead to such conspiracy theories as opposition turning the heart of voters against the president. It's inevitable for such conspiracy theory to have a field day in this context as we speak. Thank you, Charles.
Okay, Gbenga, thanks very much indeed. And let me come to you, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. I mean, I wonder who you reckon is going to lose the most from this cash swap crisis, because as we said, the APC presidential candidate, Bola Tinubu, and his campaign council have distanced themselves from it, while the other main parties have done the same while supporting the principle and the policy.
Well, that's a big question. This is going to make a huge dent on the ruling APC. As much as the party tries to distance themselves from the presidency in terms of this particular policy, because of how much outrage it has caused in the country. I say again, like I said the other day, it's difficult to do that. Everybody goes to the banking hall and they are screaming and shouting against the APC. It's a difficult one for them. I do not know how they arrived at this situation. The APC candidate, of course, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, knows and understands that this is terrible for his campaign. And so he is doing everything possible with these three governors to make sure that they tell Nigerians that we are not part of this. We are part of you. We hear your sufferings. We feel you. And we want to work with you. Vote for us for another term. Whether that is going to happen, I'm not sure. We will see by February 25 whether they're able to persuade people to vote for them again. But the central argument for me here is about the judiciary, how it's very easy to procure ex parte orders, by anybody. When we look at the history of the judiciary in the last almost 8 years, there have been crises, cases of credibility, a lack of credibility of judges. I mean, in this country, people have become governors based on Supreme Court judgments. People have become Senate candidates, even when they did not involve themselves in the primaries, and they got the Supreme Court judgment and they scaled over. And so many other things have happened in this administration that seemed like they're quite dismissive of the judiciary and have not given them the respect that they need to have as an independent arm of government. So the question is, what do we do about the judiciary? Why all this kind of crisis? How do we, even in the MBA, for instance, speak to judges? Are there punishments? Is there a way that we can have a clean judiciary and clean up the mess that often comes up in this kind of situation?
Yes, and that will remain a rhetorical question at the moment. But let me come to you, Professor Adeniyi, because just listening to what Dr. Ikokwu was saying a hot second ago, do you see all this fueling further distrust in the government and by extension the APC and possibly the banking system?
Well, I think it depends on the approach the government uses, to solve the problem, It depends on the solution they're able to find, and of course how maybe the Supreme Court this time, since this is a court that the Attorney General has gone to, and it was the Supreme Court that the three governors, resorted to, and of course the Supreme Court also gave the judgment. So it's possible that the Supreme Court will once more intervene, coming up with another kind of policy intervention, as the case could be. So, and of course, do not forget the point I've severally made, what about the option of a political solution, rather than resort to the back and forth of court, which can sometimes be unpredictable. So we just hope that our leaders will rise up to the occasion and, of course, find ways of mitigating the pains, or the pains that's already in the system, and preventing it from increasing against the background of the critical exercise of election, which is just something that doesn't come all the time, comes every 4 years, and the significance to the evolution of our democracy, cannot be overemphasized. That's why, once more, all hands have to be on deck to make sure that we succeed at it.
Okay, and on the note of that wise counsel, I want to thank all of you exceedingly. Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, who is a professor of communications, Arise News analyst, and deputy dean of the postgraduate school at Bayes University in Abuja. The journalist, political affairs commentator, and Arise News analyst, Dr. Constance Ikokwu, and of course the Arise political reporter and current affairs analyst, Gbenga Ashiru. Thank you very much indeed. And that's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.